But yeah, I agree with you. Like the process itself is something that cannot be replaced by AI. And then like I'm again, I'm not trying to say, okay, you should drop everything and sell your equipment, sell your lighting, just go full AI and create those images. Um, I'm against that because I think that we're living also in the world where we are completely disconnected from each other. The human connections becoming very, very kind of, I don't know, different nowadays, and getting into, kind of connecting with people becoming more and more difficult. Speaking also on that, I did this interesting blog post and also like a little reel about um, dating world where people just kind of create their own world to showcase who they are when it comes to finding like a partner, or I don't know, love in their life, through AI apps, right, where they kind of crafting how they look, how they behave, who they are, and all this stuff. And it's almost 90% it's fake. We all know that, right? So imagery is extremely powerful, right? But also I think we abuse it a little bit because like I'm gonna kind of drift off a little bit of our topic, but I had this interesting discussion the other day about photography in general because people say like, oh, this is what you do, it's bad because it's AI created. But let's be honest, like when you look at even our photography, we retouch the images, we color grade, we crop it, we use specific lenses, we use specific lighting, we use AI to do all sorts of different adjustments to give the image specific feel, specific look. So are those images really kind of real? Because if you look at so many of those photographers who, okay, this is the raw image and this is the final product, it looks completely different. And we do that for years. It's not something that we, okay, oh, this is AI who just kind of destroying everything. We use retouching for years now, and we completely
Yeah.
reshape people and do all sorts of manipulation to bring these images to kind of specific level of how we feel about it, how the person looks. We remove things, we make people thinner, with color grading, with skin, removing on the pimples. We just completely remove all the reality from those images, right? So it's not
Absolutely.
something new. I think the AI is the next step where we just like now can really shape it to this like the last piece of image, so it looks extremely altered and kind of like created to this very, very specifics that we want this image to look like, right? So I think we are in this process for a very long time. Now we have reached the point where we kind of have the next level. What do we can do with those images?
Yeah, it's not even. It's not just even retouching. It's also just simply light and shadow. You just need to look at George Orwell's portrait work. Very dark shadows. We hide things in the shadows. We highlight things in the highlights. We reshape faces by the way we just use highlights and shadows. It doesn't even have to go as far as retouching. Even
Mhm.
photography is a way of creating it's like a hyper real world almost, where we show people what we want to show them and we hide from them what we want to hide from them. Whether that is, imperfections in the skin, or whether that is, through shadow and the highlight, um, or whether it's through AI. It doesn't really matter. The principle is exactly the same. And like you said, I 100% agree. AI is just another tool to do that. I know, and people are going to listen to this, and people are allowed to have a completely different opinion. That's absolutely totally fine. And of course, there's circumstances where it does matter. Like competitions, for example, or something like that. There are circumstances, without a doubt, and there is need for rules and and whatever. But it's it was possible to do that when Photoshop came around. It's possible to do it now. I'm not really necessarily that terribly concerned about that. But it's exact. I 100% agree with you. Um, in your personal work, when it comes to using AI tools, do you have a limit, or do you draw the line somewhere? What is your sort of, or do you have sort of a line in the back of your mind where you go like, well, I'm going to go this far and no further?
So first of all, what I want to say, I am, or I'm, do everything what I can to be extremely transparent with those shots. So I'm not like saying, oh, those are real images, I shot them or whatever, right? Like, as you see, like every image which I'm putting out has this AI little emblem on the top that, I'm honest, this is AI. This is not real. This is fake person. This is not something that I created through photography. It's straight AI. I did that for prompting and kind of different type of manipulation to get to this final shot, right? So that's the first thing. When it comes to kind of my original work, as we spoke a little bit, the only thing what I do when it comes to my headshots is implementing the backgrounds. So that's I don't do any other crazy stuff. I have insane requests sometimes. Just speaking of that, how people also from because I hear a lot of criticism from people like, oh, we want to just see people, we want to just see real, kind of I don't know, like real subject, because this is what you do. It's fake. These people don't even exist. But then when you look at it, those people who are actually our subject, they're coming to you and they say, like, make me skinnier, like, 20 pounds, or, clean my face, or, fix my teeth and, make my eyes brighter. They ask you all, oh, replace my clothing nowadays. It's a big one, right? I had people who came to me for a photo shoot and they wearing t-shirts, and then they're like, oh, can you put me in a suit or beautiful dress and all this. I know you can do that. So it's kind of fascinating for me that from one hand people pushing towards this reality, but from the other hand, when it comes to me and you shooting me, I want to have this image altered to this freaking edge because I want to look stunning. I want to look like a supermodel. I want to look like like I'm just the perfect from every angle. So that's kind of like interesting for me, how we navigate for this, depends, how they look at this whole thing, right? If this is for me, I want to be perfect. But when you're using fake people, all of a sudden you're the bad person, right? Um, so when it comes to also using AI, like at this point, what I'm trying to do is explore the ideas which I had in my mind for many, many years, and I could never photograph them, because there is limits, right? We talk about it, financial limit, location limits, kind of concept limits. There's, the list goes on and on and on. And I know I wouldn't be able to do those images. Um, so yeah, so this is what I'm doing right now is exploring, what the AI can do, and how far I can push it. I know there's no boundaries at this point. This is what I've learned because every crazy idea I had, I was able to kind of bring it to life. And also I know that my brain is kind of, I don't know how I can say it. I know it's going to maybe sound a little bit bizarre, but now I started really thinking differently because now I can really take any of those crazy ideas and then, as I said, bring it to life. So now I'm trying to think about those different concepts, how I can make this even more unrealistic or something that kind of breaks all those rules and breaks all this limitations we have, even on this planet. Like even when I did this concept with those astronauts, right? Like who would be able to do this a few years ago, getting access. Actually, the funny story, I actually had this photo shoot with Canadian astronauts. That was like I think 4 years ago, and she said to me that, oh, maybe one day you can kind of photograph me in my astronaut like the whatever, I don't want to say costume, it's like what it's
Uh,
called,
the spacesuit?
the spacesuit, yes.
Yeah.
And she said that, it costs about $150,000 or something, like this insane amount of numbers. And, even for them to get access to it, it's impossible. They whatever, they have a mission or something, they can get access to it, but it's just something that they cannot even touch because it's expensive, it's specifically designed for them. It's not like they can come in and, take it out and then put it on and take a pictures, right? It's a much more complex process. Um, but also, I think, we can use AI to really expand our thinking and creativity and, ideas and concepts. this was not possible before because we could all use our imagination, and we have this interesting conversation before we jump on the podcast about Star Wars, and we talk a little bit about Avatar, that people have this crazy ideas, crazy concepts which they would like to bring to life, right? And then if that wouldn't be something that, I don't know, it's not interesting. Like, let's talk about Avatar. I can remember James Cameron said, like, I had this idea about this movie, but I was not able to create this because I didn't have tools. I didn't have kind of ways of doing this. I had to have specific equipment, a specific, I don't know, like the AI generators, you name it, to bring this to life. But then, this film was created, this idea, and look, was a hit. People watch this till today and I love it. I go to this freaking movie like every few months because it's just every time you see something different, something new. So I think the same with the AI, and this is what we do. I think the difference is right now that every person can do that, right? You can be going online, and I'm not saying you're going to monetize from this. You can just create this stuff for yourself. Again, we had this conversation about, and I know I'm just jumping all over the place, but we have a discussion about my son who came from school the other day, and like he was quite upset, and I just kind of jump on chat GPT, and I kind of come up with this idea like what images I could create to make him laugh. And the AI started kind of like spitting out some images of different animals with this funny poses and interesting kind of like features on their faces, and making funny faces. And I show him this stuff, and he just like, you start laughing, and then like all of a sudden he's in a good mood, and it was just bunch of images, right? So I think if we kind of look at this AI creation, we can use those stuff to some positive things where we can, I don't know, uplift people, we can motivate them, we can inspire them, we can bring some ideas to life, and then inspire them. Because as I said, like it's a process. So maybe my ideas, the stuff what I'm creating, maybe inspire somebody else, and like, okay, you know what, I love those images, maybe I can do something different. So we just kind of expanding the way of creativity, of way we think, we look at the world. I did another series about the war, which also, we're living in this freaking crazy times where, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Looking at the current state of, what's happening in the Middle East and then the United States, and, like all over the world, economy crisis, the tariff crisis. I don't want to go political, but what I'm trying to say, maybe we can use those images to kind of make people, I don't know, pause for a second and think about, our world, how we can be better people, how we can, I don't know, inspire others, how we can help each other. And this is my goal. Like, this is what I want to use AI. I want to use those imageries to inspire people. I don't know, bring some issues to the world, to kind of, I don't know, as I said, take a pause and think about, what the hell's going on in our world, and, how we can be better people.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip, then press here for the full episode in glorious Technicolor. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe.